Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. The book of Proverbs is probably the oldest extant document of the Hebrew wisdom records, written around 960 to 686 BC. Wisdom literature flourished throughout the ancient Near East, with Egyptian examples dating back to before the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. It revolved around the wise men and scribes in the service of the court, and consisted primarily in maxims about the practical, intelligent way to conduct one's life, and in speculations about the very worth and meaning of human life. The most common form of these wise sayings, which were intended for oral instruction, especially in the schools and courts run by the wise men, was Proverbs in the Old Testament Bible. Proverbs 22 speaks of the 30 sayings of the wise. Widely regarded as one of the masterpieces of ancient Kemetic wisdom literature, and has been of particular interest to modern scholars because of its relationship to the biblical book of Proverbs, is the Instructions of Amenemope, a literary work comprised in Kemet, ancient Egypt, during the Ramesside period 1300 to 1075 BC. It contains 30 chapters of advice for successful living. It was written by the scribe Amenemope as a legacy for his son. The work reflects on the inner qualities, attitudes, and behaviors required for a happy life in the face of increasingly difficult social and economic circumstances. Amenemope writes about inner peace, achieved through patient endurance and passive acceptance of an inscrutable divine will. He draws a contrast between two types of men: the silent man who goes about his business without drawing attention to himself or demanding his rights, and the heated man who makes a nuisance of himself to everyone and is constantly picking fights with everyone over matters of no real importance. Amenemope counsels modesty, self-control, generosity, and scrupulous honesty, while discouraging pride, impetuosity, self-advancement, fraud, and perjury, not only out of respect for Ma'at, the cosmic principle of right order, but also because attempts to gain advantage to the detriment of others incur condemnation, confuse the plans of the gods, and leads to disgrace and punishment. Let's compare a few examples of the respective texts. Give thine ear and hear what I say, and apply thine heart to apprehend. It is good for thee to place them in thine heart. Let them rest in the casket of thy belly, that they may act as a peg upon thy tongue. In Proverbs, incline thy ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply thine heart to my doctrine, for it is pleasant if thou keep them in thy belly, that they may be established together upon thy lips. Amenemope chapter 30. Look to these 30 chapters. They inform, they educate. In the Bible, have I not written for you 30 sayings of counsel and knowledge? Beware of robbing the poor and oppressing the afflicted. Proverbs says, rob not the poor, for he is poor, neither oppress the lowly in the gate. Associate not with a passionate man, nor approach him for conversation. Leap not to cleave to such an one, that terror carry thee not away. In Proverbs, do not befriend the man of anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest thou learn his ways and take a snare for thy soul. A scribe who is skillful in his business findeth worthy to be a courtier. In Proverbs, if you see a man quick in his work, before kings will he stand, before cravens he will not stand. Eat not bread in the presence of a ruler, and lunge not forward with thy mouth before a governor, When thou art replenished with that to which thou hast no right, it is only a delight to thy spittle. Look upon the dish that is before thee, and let that alone supply thy need. In Proverbs, when thou sittest to eat with a ruler, consider diligently what is before thee, and put a knife to thy throat. If thou be a man given to appetite, be not desirous of his dainties, for they are breads of falsehood. Amenemope chapter 11 says, The mouthful of bread great thou swallowest and vomitest up, and art emptied of thy good. Proverbs says, The morsel which thou hast eaten shalt thou vomit up, and lose thy sweet words. Remove not the landmark from the bounds of the field, and violate not the widow's boundary. Proverbs, Remove not the widow's landmark, and enter not into the field of the fatherless. Give thine ears, hear the words that are said. Give thine heart to interpret them. In the Bible, apply thine heart unto instruction, and thine ears to the words of knowledge. Despite the obvious similarities between the two texts, and amid the scholarly consensus that the biblical narrative in Proverbs was clearly borrowed from the instructions of Amenemope, some have sought to argue the contrary. Some of these arguments are that no matter who says or writes the truth first, it does not affect its truthfulness, inspiration, authority, or reliability of the biblical text. As Proverbs' central focus is on Yahweh, thus the context is correct in worship of the God of Israel rather than a pagan god. Some have sought to challenge the dating of the Egyptian text, proposing that the Egyptians copied from the Bible, in complete denial that such literary works could have originated from a Kemetic source. Some even to this day refute the similarities because it is not a word-for-word copy, which is probably the weakest argument of them all. Lastly, there is an argument that both texts are copied from an older Semitic common source that has now been lost. Suffice to say that all these counter-arguments have been rejected by academia for lacking evidence, let alone credible evidence. The majority have concluded that the biblical text from Proverbs 22 verse 17 through to 23 verse 10 was dependent and copied from the literary works of Amenemope as the original source. Thank you.